No, that title is not clickbait. There really was a Soviet reindeer that became a submariner in World War II, and it's kind of funnier and stupider than you think. Welcome back to 5 Minute History, the weekly series where patrons choose the topic. This week we're talking about Pollyanna, courtesy of Grievous Rommel. In 1941, the British T-class submarine HMS Trident stopped very briefly for repairs in the Soviet Union. After making friends with the local dockyard workers in the township, it was at this point the crew of the Trident received two gifts to honour the new alliance between the USSR and the British Empire in these very early and dark, scary days of World War II. One of these gifts was a barrel of moss, which taken by itself is a little weird, but the other one was a little reindeer called Pollyanna. Now, I should say there are a few different stories on how exactly this all went down. This is the more sane story, that she was gifted to the British crew as a token of gratitude for their assistance in fighting the Germans. And that's the story I went with and I tend to believe. But the far more fun story, and the far more, we'll just say, Russian Navy story, is that the captain of the Trident went and had dinner with a Soviet port admiral or port officer. During this dinner, the captain of the Trident mentioned how his wife was having problems with the snow in England that year and how it was causing some issues for his wife getting around due to having a newborn and a pram. The Soviet admiral then proceeded to decide very loudly that the captain of the submarine's solution to this problem of, the pram not getting through the snow was to have his child pulled by reindeer through the streets of London. And he ordered one to be sent aboard. You know what, on second thought, after the 2nd Pacific Squadron, I kind of believe it. And yes, if you are wondering, I'm just imagining a Peaky Blinder pulling a child in a sort of sled thing in London. It's very weird. But anyway, Pollyanna would in total spend 6 weeks aboard HMS Trident. The plan was for Pollyanna to live in a torpedo storage area because, of course, where else would you put it? But this is a reminder that this is a literal reindeer. You can't really tell it to not move when it decides to get up and walk around. So Pollyanna, getting bored in the torpedo storeroom, decided to go and explore, and it set up shop in the captain's cabin. The thing is, though, that again, it's a literal reindeer. So do you really think a barrel of moss was going to keep it fed for long? No, the answer is no. And it's not like the submarine can just pop over into occupied Norway and ask for some reindeer feed. That's probably not going to go down well with the, jackboots on the ground. So Pollyanna instead simply began eating the crew's leftovers, namely vegetables, and it was during this period that she found a fondness for sweetened condensed milk, which, valid. Allegedly, this wasn't enough though, and apparently the boat's charts got eaten as well. They became part of the menu, and I'm imagining that, you're a German sailor and you're on a merchant ship, you get torpedoed, the submarine service is nearby, and you find out there's a bloody reindeer at the controls eating the charts. Anyway, HMS Trident would eventually conclude her patrol off Norway after 6 weeks, and she would come into port, docking in Blyth. But there was a slight issue here. See, after eating all the veggies, the leftovers, and as much condensed milk as she could find, Pollyanna was, fat, and she couldn't get out of the submarine. Again, I want you to imagine having to explain this to an admiral, that your submarine has a reindeer stuck in it, because a Soviet gave you one because he thought your wife could use it to pull your child around the streets of London. Thankfully though, after some work, the crew was able to sort of jury-rig a winch and get the poor animal through the conning tower and onto land. Now, like the story of Wojciech, the bear that was in Polish service, the powers that be ruined all the fun, and Pollyanna would eventually be resigned to live in a zoo, away from condensed milk and paper as her chosen diet. Probably for the best too, the captain of the Trident decided that maybe having a really, really fat reindeer with a chart and condensed milk obsession pulling his baby around London was, not ideal, and he would leave the job to his wife. Pollyanna would then later live the remainder of her life, thankfully in peace, being looked after and fed a healthy diet by her carers. However, sadly, all stories do come to an end. With the war over, the hard-worked 10-year-old HMS Trident would return from her deployment to the Far East on the 17th of February 1946. She would then be sold for scrapping, being an older design, and of course newer designs were coming in, so it was kind of pointless to keep this old relic around. However, and honestly this is kind of a sweet fact, her scrapping would not be completed until 1947, the very same year Pollyanna would pass away in care. There are some stories that say even though she spent just 6 weeks on the submarine, Pollyanna picked up a few, behavioural intricacies. One of the weird ones was that she would hide when alarms sounded, not in fear like, a normal animal would with a really loud alarm going off like an air raid siren, but she would take cover and bow her head in a corner, kind of like she was preparing for the crew to rush into the torpedo room to fire the torpedoes. She would get out of the way. Allegedly, whenever the air raid sirens in London or the zoo alarms would sound, she would mimic this behaviour for the rest of her life. So this is during the V1, V2 era. So yeah, it's interesting what this little deer picked up just after 6 weeks. But that's the story of Pollyanna, the Soviet Submariner Reindeer. There's no sane way to describe it, is there? Thank you to Grievous Rummel for recommending this topic. I thought it was fun, and thank you all for coming today to this fun episode of 5 Minute History. This time, unlike so many others, with a very happy ending. Like, comment, subscribe, and I will catch you all next time.